Most of the job is numbers. Miles left on the route, fuel range, refrigeration temperature, delivery time printed on a bill of lading somewhere in the cab. When you haul refrigerated freight, everything revolves around keeping the trailer at the right temperature. If the produce warms up even a few degrees, someone down the line rejects the load, and suddenly everyone's arguing about paperwork. I'm 46. Been driving long-haul reefer trucks for close to 20 years. Mostly produce out of California, headed east. Lettuce, strawberries, things that don't tolerate mistakes. That week I was hauling pallets of packaged greens from Salinas to a distribution center outside Topeka. Straight run across Interstate 80 for most of it. Solo trip. Strict delivery window. My refrigeration unit was set to 34 degrees Fahrenheit and locked there. That number gets burned into your head after a while. 34. Too cold and you freeze the product. Too warm and it starts wilting. By the time I reached western Nebraska, it was late. Actually early. The dash clock said 2:17 a.m. when I eased the truck into a gravel lot beside an old way station that looked closed for the night. No lights on the building. Just highway noise out on the interstate and wind moving across the plains. Truckers know those little unofficial parking spots. You pull in, catch an hour or two of sleep, then roll again. The wind was steady that night. Not strong, just enough that you could hear it brushing along the aluminum trailer walls. I shut down the engine, but left the refrigeration unit running. That compressor has its own rhythm. Cycle on. Hum for a few minutes. Shut off. After years of driving, that sound is basically background noise. Somewhere around 2:41 a.m., the refrigeration monitor beeped. One sharp tone. Not loud. Just enough to pull me out of that half-sleep truckers get. The screen on the dash showed a temperature alert. Rear trailer sensor. But the reading still said 34 degrees Fahrenheit. I stared at it for a few seconds. Reefer units throw false alerts sometimes when the compressor cycles. Cold air hits the sensor the wrong way, and the system thinks something changed. So I reset the alarm. That's when I noticed the code. Rear door opening. Which didn't make sense. The trailer doors were sealed with a metal security tag. Those tags go through the handle and snap shut. If someone opens the doors, the tag breaks. Simple system. And I hadn't left the cab. Wind kept sliding across the trailer. The refrigeration unit hummed again. Nothing else. So I told myself what every driver tells themselves at 2 a.m, sensor glitch. I leaned the seat back and tried to sleep again. Not sure exactly how long passed. The time on the dash later said 3:08 a.m, but I don't remember looking right away. What woke me wasn't a sound. It was the truck shifting. Not much. Just a slow movement through the suspension like weight adjusting behind me. Cargo settles sometimes. Pallets shift a little after hundreds of miles of vibration. That happens. Still, something made me glance at the dashboard. Modern trucks track weight distribution through the axles. A little digital readout sits near the fuel gauge. The numbers flickered. Rear axle load changed slightly. Then again. 3 movements total. Each one a few seconds apart. Cargo settling should be random. 1 shift maybe. Not 3 evenly spaced adjustments like that. For a minute I ran through the usual explanations. Pallet leaning. Wood braking. Maybe a forklift stacked something uneven back in Salinas. My brain does that automatically. Trying to isolate the variable. That's trucking. The wind outside kept moving. Compressor kicked on again. I noticed something else while sitting there. My left boot had been rubbing my heel since sometime back in Wyoming. I remember adjusting it and thinking I should have worn thicker socks. Completely unrelated thought. Then the monitor beeped again. 3:26 a.m. Another alert. Rear trailer temperature rising. The display jumped from 34 degrees Fahrenheit to 39 degrees Fahrenheit. That part stopped making sense. A sealed refrigerated trailer doesn't warm that fast unless the doors are open or the cooling unit fails. And I could hear the compressor running fine. Cold air should have been blasting through the duct channels along the ceiling. My mouth felt dry suddenly. Not panic exactly. Just that quiet moment where your brain pauses and tries to catch up. I opened the cab door and climbed down. Wind moving over the highway shoulder. Distant semis passing somewhere out on Interstate 80. The refrigeration unit hummed steadily behind me. Walking toward the back of the trailer, gravel crunching under my boots, I kept watching the metal seal hanging through the door handles. Still there. Unbroken. That was the part one kept coming back to. Nothing about that seal suggested anyone had touched the doors. I stood there for a second listening. Aluminum trailers make little sounds in the wind. Soft taps and flexing. That's normal. But one noise didn't quite match the others. A faint metallic tap near the latch. I don't remember exactly how long I stood there. Maybe 30 seconds. Maybe longer. My hand reached for the handle without really deciding to. The security tag was still locked. But the handle itself, the metal felt warm. Not hot, just warm enough that it didn't match the cold night air. That's when the thought landed. Not quickly. Slow. The alarm code. The weight shifts. The temperature spike. All pointing to the same place. Inside the trailer. And the doors had never opened. I didn't open them then either. That might sound strange. But drivers are trained not to break a load seal unless the receiver tells you to. If the seal breaks early, suddenly you're explaining things to dispatch, insurance, everyone. Instead, I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, pulled onto Interstate 80. Nothing unusual happened during the rest of the drive. The refrigeration unit held steady again at 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Weight readings stayed normal. The wind died down somewhere past Lincoln. I delivered the load outside Topeka later that afternoon. Dock workers broke the seal and opened the trailer doors while I stood nearby signing paperwork. Every pallet was exactly where it should be. Boxes stacked tight, plastic wrap intact, cold air spilling out like normal. The receiver glanced at the refrigeration log printed by the unit. Then he frowned. 3 temperature spikes overnight. No door openings recorded. He asked if the trailer had been parked somewhere warm. I told him about the way station stop. That was it. Since that night, I don't park the same way anymore. If I have to stop overnight, I angle the truck so the trailer doors sit directly in my mirrors. That way I can see them without getting out of the cab. Just a habit. One more small routine in a job built on routines. The refrigeration unit logs everything. Temperature, compressor cycles, motion sensors. A week later, dispatch emailed the final trip data. Buried in the system report was something I hadn't noticed before. Interior motion sensors activated during the parked period. 3 times. Exact same timestamps as the axle weight shifts. But the trailer doors never opened. Truckers spend most of their lives hauling freight across empty miles. And most nights, the road really is quiet. But sometimes I think about that sealed trailer sitting behind the cab in the Nebraska wind, and how quiet things can look from the outside. If that idea of something moving inside a locked trailer got to you, go ahead, smash that like button. Subscribe so you never miss the next nightmare. Tell me which story messed with you the most. And if you think being alone on the highway means you're the only one out there, click now to watch 3 disturbing hospital horror stories. Because sometimes the quiet places between cities aren't empty at all. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare. Most fuel drivers will tell you the same thing if you ask them long enough. Gasoline behaves in predictable ways. Temperature changes make it expand. Pressure changes show up on the gauges. Valves open or close, and the numbers respond exactly the way the manuals say they should. It's a system built around measurement. That's probably why that delivery still bothers me. I was 39 at the time, hauling fuel for a regional distributor in Wyoming. Night runs mostly. Rural stations that prefer deliveries when the pumps are closed and no customers are around. Less traffic. Fewer safety issues. Tankers aren't like regular freight trailers. Everything is sealed compartments and pressure systems. Before every stop you run through the same checklist in your head. Valve positions, tank levels, grounding cable, static discharge. I tend to double check everything anyway. Always have. That night I was running down State Route 287, heading for a little roadside gas station somewhere between Rollins and Lander. Automated pumps. No overnight staff. The paperwork in my binder listed the delivery as invoice number 77341. Just a small drop, 2 compartments of regular gasoline. The station came into view around 1:54 a.m. 1 canopy light glowing over the pumps. The rest of the place dark. High desert wind moving across the open land the way it always does out there. Steady. Dry. You can hear it moving around the truck even with the engine running. I parked the tanker beside the underground tank ports and shut the engine down. First thing I noticed stepping out of the cab was the cold. Clear sky. No clouds. That kind of Wyoming night where the temperature drops faster than you expect. The security lights above the pumps made a low humming sound. I remember that because my left shoulder had been stiff from driving, and I was rolling it around while I listened to that hum. Nothing unusual, at least not yet. The first thing I always check before connecting hoses is the pressure gauge on the tanker compartments. Gasoline tanks build pressure during long drives, especially when temperature changes between states. You bleed that pressure off slowly before opening anything. The gauge needle looked normal. Then it dropped. Just a little. Not much. Then it rose again. The digital display next to it flickered. 2:06 a.m. Pressure drop recorded. I watched it for another few seconds. The needle dipped again. Same amount. Then a third time. 3 identical drops. Temperature differences can do that sometimes. Fuel cooling after a long drive. Metal contracting. That was the explanation I landed on. Still, the pattern felt a little too neat. Pressure fluctuations are usually random. Wind pushed across the tanker's metal shell. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote started howling. I shrugged it off and walked over to the underground tank monitor mounted on the side of the station building. Those monitors track how much fuel is entering the station tanks during delivery. Normally the numbers stay flat until you connect the hoses. The screen already showed movement. Fuel entering tank, 14 gallons. That made me stop, because the hose was still coiled on the truck. I remember staring at the screen, waiting for the numbers to reset. Maybe the sensor was lagging from the last delivery. That happens sometimes. The display climbed again. 19 gallons. I turned and looked back at the tanker automatically. The compartment gauge on the truck showed something I didn't like. The fuel level had dropped slightly. Not much, but enough to match what the station monitor claimed had entered the tank. Which shouldn't be possible. No hose connected. No valve open. Fuel can't move through sealed steel. For a few seconds I started running through every possibility. Faulty station sensor. Gauge calibration problem. Electronic glitch in the monitoring system. That's the part of the job I trust the most, troubleshooting the equipment. Numbers either line up or they don't. Standing there beside the tanker, though, I noticed something else. A sound. Soft. Metal on metal. At first I thought it was just the wind moving across the tanker shell. Those long cylindrical tanks can flex a little when the air moves across them. But this sounded different. A hollow echo, like something tapping the inside of an empty drum. That didn't make sense. Fuel compartments are never empty during delivery runs. They're partially full, which dampens sound. No space for echoes. The noise came again. One dull metallic knock from somewhere inside the tanker body. My mouth went dry. Without really thinking about it, I walked toward the ladder mounted along the side of the tank. Drivers climb that ladder to inspect the hatch covers on top. Each compartment has a sealed metal lid. The wind pushed against the truck hard enough that the ladder rattled slightly. I climbed halfway up. Then stopped. One of the hatch covers sat right at eye level. Closed. Locked. Sealed. Everything looked normal. Still, something made me reach out. My hand touched the metal hatch. Cold air everywhere around me. The hatch cover felt warm. Not hot. Just warmer than the air should allow. That was the moment my brain stopped trying to troubleshoot sensors. Something had moved inside that compartment, and the hatch had never opened. I don't remember exactly how long I stayed on that ladder. Probably less than a minute. Eventually I climbed back down and stood beside the tanker, staring at the gauges again. The station monitor read 22 gallons transferred. The tanker compartment showed a matching drop. I never connected the hoses. Never opened a valve. The delivery didn't happen. Instead, I climbed back into the cab. Started the truck. Called dispatch. Told them the station monitoring system was malfunctioning and I couldn't verify a safe transfer. They told me to abort the drop and return to the depot, which is exactly what I did. The depot technicians inspected the tanker the next morning. Pressure valves, compartment seals, fuel lines, everything. Their measurements showed one thing clearly. 22 gallons missing from the compartment. No leaks. No open valves. Nothing in the maintenance logs explaining it. The shipment paperwork still showed the full volume leaving the refinery earlier that evening. Since then, I don't run single-stop deliveries in the middle of the night. If dispatch schedules one, I ask them to pair it with another stop nearby. 2 stations instead of 1. More activity. More movement around the truck. Maybe that sounds irrational, but fuel drivers spend their lives trusting sealed systems. Pressure tanks. Steel valves. Numbers on a gauge. The pressure chart from that delivery is still in the company database. 3 identical drops recorded at 2:06 a.m. No valve activity, no recorded transfers. Just a sealed tanker sitting in the Wyoming wind. Fuel systems are designed so nothing moves unless a valve opens. That's how the whole industry works. But sometimes the numbers say something moved anyway. If the idea of fuel disappearing from a sealed tanker left you thinking about it, go ahead, smash that like button. Subscribe so you never miss the next nightmare. Tell me which story messed with you the most. And if you think empty highways mean nothing unusual can happen out there, click now to watch 3 disturbing Airbnb horror stories. Because sometimes the quiet places where trucks park overnight aren't as empty as they look. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare. Animals notice things before people do. Anyone who works around livestock long enough learns that. A horse will stare at an empty field for 10 minutes straight. Cattle will suddenly bunch together for no obvious reason. Dogs will bark at a corner of the room where nothing seems to be. Usually there's an explanation. A smell. A sound you can't hear yet. A truck coming down a road half a mile away. Still, when animals all react the same way at the same time, you pay attention. I was 44 when this happened, hauling cattle between ranches and processing yards across Texas and Oklahoma. Overnight runs mostly. Less heat for the animals and less traffic on the roads. Livestock trailers are different from regular freight. They're alive back there. You learn to listen while you drive. Hooves shifting. A low grunt now and then. Sometimes a chain clinking against the metal partitions. That background noise becomes part of the road. The trip that night started a few hours north of Amarillo. Small ranch outside Pampa. 32 head of cattle divided across the trailer compartments. One of those sections was labeled B4. For animals inside that one. Normal load. The rancher had finished loading them just after midnight. Dust hanging in the air under the yard lights. The usual smell of hay and manure. Nothing unusual. I remember one completely random thing from that loading yard. My right boot lace had started coming loose halfway through the process. I retied it while leaning against the trailer gate. Thought about replacing those laces when I got home. That's the kind of detail that sticks with you later. The route to the unloading yard outside Amarillo took a couple hours down dark farm roads before connecting to a state highway. Warm night. Dry air. Windows cracked open in the cab. For most of the drive the cattle behaved exactly the way cattle usually do. Some shifting. Occasional breathing sounds through the slats. Chains rattling lightly when the trailer hit bumps. Around 2:48 a.m., something changed. All the noise stopped. Not gradually. 1 second there were normal sounds behind the cab. Hooves scraping, a low grunt somewhere in the middle compartments. Then silence. Every animal quiet at once. I noticed it immediately because livestock rarely stay silent that long during a drive. There's always at least one restless animal moving around. Still, I told myself they'd settled down. Animals do sleep during long hauls sometimes, especially when the road smooths out. The highway tires hummed along the asphalt. Wind moved through the trailer slats. Nothing else. A few minutes passed like that. Then the sensor panel on the dash lit up. Modern livestock trailers have basic load sensors. They track weight distribution across the axles, so drivers know if animals shift too far to one side. The display flickered. 3:01 a.m. Weight shift recorded. That part was normal. Animals move around. Except the cab was still quiet. No hooves. No breathing. No chains. The sensor indicator flashed again. Another shift. Same amount. Then again. 3 movements total. Each one evenly spaced. I tried to explain it to myself. Maybe the cattle were adjusting their footing slowly. Sometimes they lean together during long drives. But cattle aren't synchronized like that. Especially 32 of them. The road curved slightly as I approached a smaller farm road leading toward the unloading yard. About 3:09 a.m., something hit the trailer gate. Not hard, just a quick metallic rattle. One compartment latch vibrated against the frame. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, because that particular latch belonged to B4. And B, for only held 4 animals. For cattle don't generate enough movement to hit a steel gate like that. The road ahead was empty. No headlights behind me either. I remember slowing the truck slightly and listening harder. Still nothing from the trailer. Silence. Even the breathing sounds had stopped. That was the part one couldn't make sense of. Cattle breathe loudly in enclosed trailers. Warm air moving through their noses, steady and heavy. But for several miles, nothing. I don't remember exactly how long that stretch of silence lasted. Could have been 10 minutes. Could have been longer. The unloading yard lights appeared ahead around 3:12 a.m. Gravel driveway leading into a fenced livestock lot. When I turned off the highway, the tires crunching over gravel sounded unusually loud. A ranch worker was already waiting near the gate. Early deliveries aren't uncommon during summer. I parked the truck beside the loading chute and climbed down. Warm, dry air. Dust drifting through the lights. The worker asked the usual question. "Good trip?" "Yeah," I said. At least that's what I remember saying. We walked toward the trailer together. Chains along the side clinked slightly when I released the first latch. Cattle noise returned immediately from the forward compartments. Hooves shifting. One animal snorting. Normal sounds again, which made the silence from earlier feel strange. We opened the first compartment gate. Then the second. Animals stepped down the ramp slowly into the holding pen. Everything looked fine. When we reached the section marked B4, I stopped. That compartment held 4 cattle when we left the ranch. The latch came loose easily. The gate swung open. Inside, empty space. Just metal flooring and dried hay scattered across it. I stood there looking at it for a second. All the other compartments still had animals moving around, but B4 was empty. The worker looked at me like he thought I was joking. "Where are the other 4? I checked the gate locks again. Still sealed. Every latch exactly where it should be. No broken hinges. No bent bars. The compartment simply had no animals in it, which shouldn't be possible on a sealed livestock trailer. We finished unloading the rest of the cattle without saying much. Later that morning, the yard manager checked the transport logs and weight records. According to the trailer's axle data, the load weight never changed during the drive. 32 animals the whole time, even during the period when the sensors recorded those 3 weight shifts. No ranch in the area reported stray cattle. Nothing showed up on nearby roads either. The first thing I did after that trip was install interior cameras in the trailer compartments. I check them every hour now during long hauls. Just a habit. The camera footage from that night still exists somewhere on my old hard drive. 18 minutes of video where every compartment sits perfectly still. No movement. No animals shifting. Just empty stalls and metal bars. But the trailer logs still show full livestock weight during that time. Animals notice things before people do. That's something every rancher knows. And sometimes the only warning you get is when every animal suddenly goes quiet. If that moment when all the cattle stop making noise stuck with you, go ahead, smash that like button. Subscribe so you never miss the next nightmare. Tell me which story messed with you the most. And if you think driving empty farm roads at night means nothing is around you, click now to watch 3 disturbing camping horror stories. Because sometimes the quiet places between ranches aren't empty at all. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare. Numbers are supposed to behave. That's the thing about hauling construction steel. Everything about the job is measurements. Weight limits, strap ratings, load balance, torque on the ratchets. If something moves, there's usually a reason you can point to. Steel doesn't improvise. At least that's what I used to think. I was 48 then, running flatbed loads around the Pacific Northwest. Mostly construction material, beams, rebar bundles, things that get dropped at job sites before the crews show up in the morning. That particular run was headed to a construction staging lot near Portland, Oregon. A bridge expansion project along the river. Delivery window before sunrise, so the crane operator could start unloading as soon as the crew arrived. Flatbed work has a routine. Load gets secured with steel straps rated for 5,400 pounds each. You tighten them with ratchets until the beams don't move even if you slam the brakes. Then you stop a couple times during the drive and check them again. That habit sticks with you. The steel on this load was heavy structural beam stock. Each one weighed right around 3,000 pounds. 8 beams total. For straps across the load. Everything looked good leaving the yard. The last leg of the drive took me through an industrial district near the river. Warehouses on both sides. Shipping yards. Big container cranes in the distance that move slow even at night. It had started raining somewhere outside the city. Not heavy rain. Just that constant coastal drizzle that taps softly on metal surfaces. I turned onto the staging lot road around 4:22 a.m. Empty place. One portable floodlight near a pile of gravel. Otherwise just darkness and wet asphalt. I parked the truck near the edge of the lot and shut the engine down. rain ticking lightly on the steel beams behind the cab. Flatbed drivers don't usually leave right away after parking. You step out and check the straps again. Temperature changes, road vibration. Sometimes they loosen during the drive. The pavement was wet enough that my boots made that hollow squeak sound when I walked around the truck. I remember noticing the microwave clock in the sleeper cab earlier had been blinking 12 o'clock again. I'd unplugged it during a cleaning once and never bothered resetting it. Small detail. The first strap I checked looked normal. The second one didn't. The ratchet handle sat a little lower than I remembered. Not much. Just enough slack that the strap had loosened slightly. That happens sometimes when steel settles during transport. A beam shifts a fraction of an inch, and the tension redistributes. I grabbed the ratchet and tightened it again. Problem solved. At least that's what I thought. The rain kept tapping against the beams. A crane somewhere along the river made a slow grinding noise as it rotated. Then something behind me clicked. Not loud, just the sharp metal snap of a ratchet strap pulling tight. I turned. One of the straps across the rear beams had tightened on its own. The ratchet handle had moved upward, like someone had cranked it one notch. For a moment I stood there looking at it. Temperature shifts can tighten straps. Steel contracts slightly in cooler air. That explanation made sense. Except the movement had happened instantly. One clean pull. Not gradual tension. Still, I told myself it was nothing unusual. Flatbed work teaches you not to overthink equipment noises. I moved to the back of the trailer to check the last strap. That's when the sound came again. This one heavier. A slow sliding sound across wet steel. I froze. The noise stopped. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Rain continued tapping on the beams. Wind carried the distant hum of machinery from the port. I stepped around the side of the trailer and looked at the load. All 8 beams were still stacked exactly where they should be. Or so it looked. But something shifted again. One of the middle beams rolled slightly. Just enough that the edge moved a fraction of an inch. That beam weighed 3,000 pounds. For straps crossed over it. Steel against rubber padding shouldn't slide like that without serious force. My mouth went dry. Without deciding to, I took a few steps backward away from the trailer. The rain had picked up slightly, drops running down the metal surfaces. Then it happened again. A heavy metallic slide. Slow, deliberate. One beam moved. Not far, but enough that I could see the gap changing between it and the beam beside it. My brain started running through explanations automatically. Loose strap, improper load placement, friction loss from rainwater. I tried to isolate the variable. That's what drivers do when something doesn't add up. But nothing about the setup should allow movement like that, especially not after the truck had stopped. I don't remember exactly how long I stood there watching the trailer. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe longer. Eventually I stepped closer. The rain had made the steel surface slick. I grabbed a flashlight from the cab and pointed it across the load. That's when I saw it. One beam had shifted toward the trailer edge. Not a little. About 6 inches. The straps still crossed over it exactly where they had before. Nothing broken. Nothing loose. Just the beam sitting in a new position. And the straps still tight. That was the moment my brain started considering something else. Not what moved the beam, but where the force came from. Because the straps held it down from above. Which meant the movement would have had to come from underneath. I don't know why I didn't just drive away right then. Maybe habit. Maybe stubbornness. Flatbed drivers are used to fixing problems instead of leaving them. Still, I decided not to unload anything until daylight. The crane operator wouldn't arrive for another couple hours anyway. So I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and waited. Nothing else moved after that. The crew arrived shortly after sunrise. The crane lifted the beams off the trailer one by one while a site supervisor checked the shipping paperwork. Everything seemed normal, until they placed one of the beams on the portable scale used for inspection. The supervisor looked at the display, then at the paperwork, then back at the display. That beam weighed 70 pounds, less than listed on the shipment record. Steel doesn't lose weight during transport. We checked the scale calibration. Perfectly accurate. The rest of the beams matched their listed weights exactly. Just that one beam, 70 pounds lighter. I finished the delivery and left the lot without saying much about the movement during the night. Drivers don't usually report things they can't explain. But since then I've changed one habit. If I'm hauling steel overnight, I don't leave the truck parked alone in a yard anymore. Either I stay in the cab where I can see the load, or I keep driving until morning. The shipping records for that beam still list the original weight. No corrections were ever made. Freight is supposed to be predictable. You measure it, secure it, deliver it. Numbers stay the same from point A to point B. But sometimes something in the middle changes the math. If the idea of a 3,000-pound beam sliding while the straps were still tight stuck with you, go ahead, smash that like button. Subscribe so you never miss the next nightmare. Tell me which story messed with you the most. And if you think empty construction yards are safe places to park at night, click now to watch 3 scary road trip horror stories. Because sometimes the quiet industrial places after midnight aren't as empty as they look. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.